what are the key risks and what are the key benefits. Now, the primary benefit of TRT is the improvement in overall well-being. And I know that sounds very like ambiguous, like it's kind of annoying how ambiguous it is. What I've seen personally is an improvement in recovery, in performance, in sleep, in hunger signaling, in sexual function. Now, these are all things that like you could say, well, like, were there avenues that you could have explored prior to TRT to improve recovery? And certainly, yeah, like, I mean, there were several avenues I did explore. But the fact is, like, me being a physique athlete, me being someone who does plan to stay within the sport of bodybuilding and frankly be in a position where body fat is arguably going to be on the cusp of being too low, just given what I do for work and then what I do for competitions, the biggest benefit, I would say, for me and for others similar to myself, is going to be that it's going to provide them stability in levels despite being in environments that ultimately would thereby cause suppression. Now, other benefits that, like, are going to be subjective: improvement in mood, in cognitive function, muscle mass. Kind of depends. Like, I have been on TRT for a long time, and I can tell you that, like, I have seen majority of the muscle accrued when I've been in a state where I can support building. I've also been in states where, like when I first started TRT, I started a prep shortly after that, and you could more so argue like I was put in a position where I had anti-catabolic effects from TRT. So I had muscle protection just having that in place. I was not at risk for excessive muscle loss despite being in a state that would allow me or would cause me to lose muscle. So what about the risk? And this is one that I think a lot of people will allow to become convoluted, but I break these up into like, here are these systemic risk that I'll say, like, risk of cardiovascular impact, risk of breast cancer. Like, these are things that I would say are very specific to the comorbidities that you are bringing to the table, the dose that you're running, and then the length of exposure in which you are incurring that risk. And the same rule of thumb kind of applies to the androgenic effects. So when we talk about like hirsutism, acne, voice deepening, clitoromegaly, like these are all things that shouldn't occur if you were staying under super physiological ranges. So if you were staying within the natural potential of normal to normal high, which, I mean, like the baseline that I use, the ceiling that I use is 100 nanograms per deciliter, you shouldn't incur those things. Those are not effects that I would say, readily expect. Those are adverse effects. Careful dosing and regular monitoring are absolutely critical in minimizing these risks. Now, why is it important to do this kind of evaluation before starting TRT? It comes down to an evaluation is going to allow you to predict whether or not you need to adjust for, a potential sensitivity to these androgenic effects. An evaluation is going to tell you whether or not you are actually going to feel the benefits of, introducing TRT as a whole, depending on if TRT is going to solve the root of the issue, that's, presenting in symptoms. Sadly, a lot of women have, normalized being at a low testosterone level, and it's not something that necessarily needs to be corrected because the symptoms are not manifesting in a way that is negatively impacting their life. However, the same thing applies to the individual who, might feel like, okay, my levels aren't necessarily super low, but the symptoms are prevalent enough where I think I could be happier. I think I could have an improved quality of life if levels were higher. An evaluation that includes detailed medical history, symptom assessment, blood test, and really identifying the exact cause of low testosterone. And this is going to hopefully ensure that we minimize the potential adverse effects, since there really isn't like female specific testosterone that is FDA approved. This is something that, again, is still very new really to our culture. And then at this point, like seeing the prevalence of accessibility increase in the last 4 to 5 years, this is now something that without a standard best standard of care. Like, I mean, there's a lot of room for trial. And, unfortunately, with testosterone having such a narrow therapeutic index, this is something that I would be very cautious of just jumping into. The purpose of it in our use, is really to make sure that we're restoring well-being that should already be there. Like, we're restoring a natural well-being. And sure, you want to go into sport mode and sit in that upper end of 80, 90, 100 nanograms per deciliter. Cool. You can yield a lot of progress out of that. But we also have to consider how this is weighted against when we look at those androgenic side effects, because testosterone is an anabolic androgenic steroid. When we think of those androgenic effects, we typically think of oily skin, acne, hair loss, and typically DHT is responsible for that. So that's why I think it's important to get DHT levels checked. In addition, when we're getting that initial panel checked, you don't need the DHT to get the full benefits of testosterone. Testosterone in itself is the anabolic, and it's responsible for building things. And frankly, I think a lot of people just assume more is better. And this is something I was talking to a client about recently, because he's wanting to start TRT. And he's okay, but even though I don't want to bodybuild, why wouldn't I go higher? Why wouldn't I just keep going high enough till I reach my goals? And I explained to him, there's a point in which you will start to convert, and estrogen will become a problem, but so will DHT. And with hair loss being his primary concern, I'm there's no free ride.